Okay, welcome. Topic is the happiness myth. What can I do to be a happier person? So, if you do a Google search, how can I be happy, or something like that, you get around 82,200,000 results. So that can be a lifetime, actually, that can keep you so busy you won't even think about your happiness, just going through all those results. But it's 82 million results. If you look at bestseller lists, books, almost always there's one or two or three about secrets, 10 secrets to be happy, 17 secrets, 18 secrets. People go to therapy, spend, no one knows exact numbers, because most people, just like Trump, didn't acknowledge that they go to therapy, just like many voters for Trump didn't say they did. It's definitely in the billions, if not more, dollars. So you have gurus and life coaches and therapists, psychologists, witch doctors. I'm not necessarily equating them all, I'm just saying there's a whole array of people, books, workshops, lectures, seminars, webinars, blogs, you name it, addressing how can you be a happier person. And especially today's day and age, technology, everything is amplified, everything is broadcast, so you have access. You don't even have to go anywhere. You could just sit, as I said, in your computer. So the question, of course, is, are we happier people as a result? With all these offerings, with promises and so on, are we happier people? So I think you know the answer. It's a rhetorical question. And actually, the more books and the more methodologies that are offered, that itself is the best evidence that it's not working. Because if it was working, if someone had a methodology, there wouldn't have to be a need for another book, because we'd ever have the method worked out. So clearly this is like an insatiable and elusive search. Happiness, it's a one word, but imagine if we were able to achieve it. So I want to talk about that. And obviously, especially when you get into the deeper dimensions of it, what really required is a redefinition of what the word happiness means in the first place. Because sometimes we may define happiness as one thing, and therefore build expectations based on that definition, and we may never realize these expectations because we have defined the wrong object. So, one is we never realize the expectations. We also may not be using the correct methods, and so on, because of the lack of understanding what happiness exactly is. So I think we need to go back to the drawing board and define what that means, and also define what it does not mean, and come away with hopefully a new approach to this elusive search, which lies at the heart of so much of our lives. Like how many of us say, if I only was a happy person, how much I could achieve. I expend so much energy in fighting my anxieties or miseries or other so-called negative energy that exists inside of us, that we can't really spend the energy and time to build and to develop and to actualize ourselves. So it lies at the heart of many, many areas with this thing called happiness. And as I said, hopefully be able to point out, based, of course, as I always base the ideas that we share here on Torah ideas, especially the Kabbalistic, mystical, the psycho-spiritual application through the mystics and the Hasidic masters, who take ideas that are really timeless, but are able to look into them in a deeper way, using whether it's biblical or Talmudic or Zoharic or other sources, and develop it into a methodology that can be used in our lives. And as I said, it's a critical topic, and as always, you have to always go back to your assumptions and definitions. So, many people define happiness, and they equate happiness with success. If I was successful, I'm happy. If I'm not successful, I'm not happy. Do you think that's accurate correlation or not? So let's define success. What does success mean? And we can't get into a loop here that success means happiness and happiness means success, because then we're not going anywhere. Okay, so success, for some, would be, a definition of success would be a good income, having a good job where you don't have to worry about where your income is in order to cover your bills and expenses and live a certain quality of life. So some would call that success. Others would define success as being a person who has a solid support team, a support system, friends, social circles, individuals that are there for you, not just in times of need, but in general. We're social creatures, and as such we need to have that type of interaction. A third definition of success could be in the level of relationships, as in romantic relationships, having a good partner, a spouse that loves you and you love them. It's a healthy intimacy, a healthy, sustainable marriage. And then, of course, the extension of that, building a healthy family. So all that, most people would agree if you had all the above that I just said, that's pretty successful. If you had only one of them, let's say you had a good income but the rest is not, most people would probably say it's not success. It's success in that area, you make an income, but what is that income if you don't have a healthy life and a healthy family, etc., etc.? So I'm using very basic definitions, not getting very transcendental here or even spiritual. But so these are definitions. Now, so one could argue then, if I had those success in those areas that I just defined, then that would lead to happiness. Because happiness is a product of things that are healthy and make you work well. Hey, there we go. I just killed God's creature. But I killed it before. But this was an act of self-defense. Because before it bites me, I bit it. Okay, it's a mosquito. I just feel bad for it. What kind of life would it have lived? Right? Don't worry, the mosquitoes get me. Yesterday I had one that bit me right here. So I'm right now on a vengeance. I'm very vigilant. Anyway, this is just an advertisement from the sponsor. Back to the topic. Okay, glad it's so success, therefore, in particular areas leads to happiness. However, we see that people do have success in the areas I just mentioned, and they're not necessarily happy, and they still feel something's missing. Sometimes they'll even say, I feel blessed, I have so many things going in my life, but I don't feel happy. So obviously, most basic way to understand that is that happiness is not about activities, even good activities that you're doing, but it's about a state of mind. And if you're a person who doesn't feel confident or secure or loved, even if there are people who love you, you don't see it or you don't feel it. So you could have success on paper, so to speak, and by all measures it seems like a successful life, but you just don't feel fulfilled. Now, nobody in this room has that, but this is not uncommon. Now, obviously, if you don't have success, it's more likely that may also lead to unhappiness. But there's also the other way around. I know people, and I'm sure you do too, who may not have success in all those areas. Some people who do not have income, they do concern, and they're very happy people. And then there are people who have all the money in the world, and they're miserable people. Some say they get even more miserable the wealthier they get. So in other words, it has nothing to do with the objectification of happiness as in a success in the area. The other areas is a little more complicated. Like, do we find people, for example, who have a healthy marriage and spouse and healthy family, a functional and healthy family, and are not happy? It's a good question. Many would argue that it should bring happiness. The problem is that if you grew up with a childhood that was not a happy one, even if you've built a healthy life, there's things that can still eat away at you. And I know many people who do have very fine families, but they personally just suffer silently. And they say, it's not because it's not because I feel I don't have blessings in my life. It just does not really fill the void that I have within me. The point I'm trying to make, of course, is it's a little more complicated. It's not like you can say that, if you're hungry, you go eat a meal, you eat a certain amount, and then you've satisfied your hunger. You've refilled your nutrients. And that's that. It's pretty black and white. It's not like someone's going to eat and eat and eat and say, no, I'm still hungry. There's a problem if someone has that, I'm not talking about addictions. I'm just saying, because it's a pretty straightforward thing. Just like if your car needs gas, you fill it up, and now it has gas until the gas runs out. When it comes, however, to the happiness quotient and element, it's a lot more. It's more psychic, so to speak. I mean psychic here as in sublime and more less not tangible. So it's a little more complicated because you can't just say, okay, do this and do that, and then you become happy. Because as I mentioned earlier, if there was someone that had such a formula, they would be billionaires, if not more, because this is the formula. So clearly, even if there is a formula, it's not that easy to apply it to yourself. So of course, the best way to go is to look at happy people. Instead of all this being a theory, look at happy people. What is it, the common denominator that makes people happy? And I go back again to the definition. So we dealt with success. So with this, in some, I would say success can be related to happiness, but it's not necessarily one leads to the next. And some things absolutely don't at all. Like financial success and happiness are not at all equatable. I do not think that you can find and say more money, more happiness. You don't see that at all. Or less money, less happy. However, in the areas that are not so materialistic, as in having, let's say, a good social circle, good friends, family, people who love you, there we could all agree that definitely has an impact on your happiness level. Again, not guaranteed because there could be other factors. But fine, we covered that, success. Now, other definitions of happiness, which are far more, I used a very basic one, success. But then there's another thing called, what people call, I feel good. Feeling good. Would you say feeling good and feeling happy is the same thing? Now, feeling good is far less, can be, from the most superficial. Feeling good, yeah, I went and watched a favorite television show, a movie, or a football game, or sports, or I did something instant gratification. I'm not even discussing whether it's healthy or unhealthy right now. Something that's instant, Yes, I went and what is it called? Indulged in something, some food that I like, or some other pleasure, sugar-coated, that doesn't last long. I think everybody agrees that is far from the word happiness. You can say that's giving you a momentary charge. They said like a jolt, just like coffee and caffeine or something like that. But to say this is the root for happiness, obviously, if a person's, now how many of us actually are turning to all kinds of self-medicating, whether physically or psychologically, in order to numb ourselves or to give ourselves little momentary pleasures to somewhat mask the deeper unhappiness that lies within. And we know that's an obvious thing, that's what people are doing all the time. We're all doing that. So when you sit down and think about it objectively, obviously no one's going to say that really is giving me happiness. It just keeps me busy or keeps me numbed from it. And this includes alcohol and drugs, sex addictions, or other addictions that are keeping you so-called satisfied on some level, even while we're doing it, we most likely know that it's not necessarily any real solution, but it's better than the alternative, which is feeling miserable. And I see this all the time. I meet people that I've known well, and they come to a point where they become, pot is their choice drug, which on one hand, arguably you can say it's not destructive or dangerous, but it's destructive psychologically because I see that they're calm perhaps, they're calmer than they would be, but they're also not motivated. So what you have as the other end of it is that you become very, what's the word for it, lethargic in a way, even though you're feeling good. So, I'm not here to critique anybody. I'm just trying to make observations of how we define happiness. Now, of course, this is one of the big plagues of our time because it's so easy to get short-term jolts I'm not sure what word to use exactly. Short-term spurts. I don't know what would we call it. Short-term injections. I don't know. Short-term pleasure, instant gratification, because it's so easy. It's so easy. Once upon a time, it wasn't that easy. Today, it's extremely easy. So what really is happening when a person resorts to these instant gratification elements, not only you're not getting happy, one could argue you're actually getting less happy. Because should you stop that, you're going to be really miserable because you've never really dealt with the issue. You never become a happy person. You just did some things that kept you busy, so to speak, and kept you distracted. Okay, so I'm just really trying to be thorough on covering the bases because I'm a big believer that when you, by process of elimination, when you identify all kinds of options, it's much easier than to get to what really is the core of what defines a happy person. Okay, so we dealt with that. Let's see, what else is, what are the usual suspects are there to address the issue of so-called happiness methods? So now you'll find, usually, when a person has drained all the options and all these above didn't work, then people often go to they go to the therapeutic, but not from the therapeutic to the spiritual. So you'll go the path of the mystic. And this can be whether it's Far Eastern disciplines or Western ones, different methodologies of the calmness within that often people associate with things like prayer or faith or meditation or yoga, exercises. And this has become very, very popular recently, mindfulness, the idea of creating space and just going into a place of somewhat calm and bliss, getting rid of the outer anxieties and going to this inner place. And this does work. I'm not denying, and this already gets into the area of really touching a more core place inside of us that when you can access that, creates a certain, here you'd use words like calm would definitely be a word, bliss, relaxation. Where you try to shed all those anxious garments, all those anxious layers that so inundate us in our lives. So you're going deeper within, and then you could say happiness then is associated with somewhat of being at peace with yourself in some way, or touching a place within. Now we know there's thousands of different expressions and words. I'm not going to go through every so-called path has its own nirvana experience. But here you can say is definitely going to a more healthier approach, because you're definitely not instant gratification and self-medication. It's not based on so-called just your life circumstances. It's really trying to access an inner place in your own soul that is peaceful. And peace is also a word. So here happiness would be associated, instead of words like what I said before, success or pleasure, especially instant pleasure, here it would be associated with things like peace, calm, relaxation, simplicity, like sometimes the simple life, just going into the woods, getting rid of all the whole rush hour of our lives. And clearly, as I said, it's doable. The challenges, of course, when it comes to this is, number one, do you have the time for it? Because at the end of the day, if you're living, especially in a Western world, New York for sure, it's not that simple. So you can carve out every day an hour, but you're still carving out. You still have to be thrown back, and it still throws bait's into the rat race. It's not so easy to live a monastic, like a lifestyle here, if you're not in a mountain somewhere in the Himalayas. It's very hard to do. You also have, I should add this, I should have stated it earlier, and you see this every day in New York, for example. You go to Central Park lunchtime, people sitting with a novel, with a book, or just sitting with a coffee, just, more or less like just taking a break. I would equate that more with something that is not really happiness directed. It's just somewhat of a respite from the harsh day. But again, I'm being thorough, so I'm covering everything here. Now, all the above, especially the last ones I'm talking about, going deeper inside yourself, it's clearly a legitimate approach. But I want to take this from a completely different angle, and that is that it still not defined really what happiness is. Even if you're to say that happiness is a result of an inner mindfulness or inner calm or getting in touch with your inner self through breathing or other things, it's still, we haven't defined happiness. We've just defined methods to get there. What exactly is happiness? Now, it's important to note that, sadly, today at least, I can't speak for previous generations, today happiness is the domain of the minority. It's a commodity that is rarer. And everybody knows what it means to be unhappy. But it's harder to find the definition of happiness, because unhappy is very clear. It makes you uncomfortable. You say, I'm not happy with my life. Happiness is a far lesser identification. Let me put it in different terms. If someone were to ask you, what does it feel like to be healthy? You couldn't really, if you had a description of what it feels like to be healthy, you'd probably need a doctor. Because health doesn't have a sensation. You're not supposed to feel healthy. Healthy is something that's so seamless and invisible. Like if someone says, what does it feel like to breathe? You say, if I can tell you what it feels like to breathe, there must be some impediment, God forbid. Breathing is just a simple process that shouldn't feel like anything. If you feel something, it already means, is it a sharp feeling, is it a dull feeling, is it this feeling, that sensation, and so on. So if you're a healthy person, you wake up in the morning, you don't feel anything, that's good, right? It's when you feel something that's not so good. Now, this doesn't mean you can't describe it at all, but it's much harder to describe health than to describe not health. Because health, it's working. I don't know exactly what's working, it's just working. My blood is pumping and it's circulating, thank God. And if God forbid it's not, my body's going to let me know. And that's not good. So it's much easier to describe the disease or illness than it is to describe health. The same is true with happiness and unhappiness. It's much easier to describe unhappiness than happiness. Because unhappiness, basically you're quite aware that I'm not feeling good today. Someone say, how are you feeling today? I'm not in a good mood. If someone says, well, I'm in a good mood, if you said that, means probably many days you're not in a good mood. That's why you have to make a statement you're in a good mood. But happy people usually don't go around with a sign, I'm happy, because it comes quite natural. Why am I saying this? Because then when you start thinking about it, then the real question I want to ask, and this is the challenging question, is what is the state of default of a human being? Is it a happiness or unhappiness? Now we look at children. All children are happy, unless something saddens them, unless they're around adults that sadden them. I'm not talking about exceptions. There are exceptions, obviously, a child born with a particular condition, or a child born who was in a pregnancy where the mother had taken something and affected the child. But children are naturally happy entities, happy people. You see it. You see how they smile, comes easily to them. Obviously they can cry easily, but children are just plain happy. What will cause unhappiness in a child is adult influences. A child exposed to unhappy adults will slowly become an unhappy child. But not that way in the beginning. A child gurgles and bubbles and is what's the word I want to use, is filled with enchantment and magic. And I don't think you'll find an exception. This has nothing to do with race, it has nothing to do with the West or the East, it has nothing to do with religion, it has nothing to do with all the above. It's not because a child has success or that a child even has inner meditation. So interestingly then, one could argue that happiness, health, and the natural state of a human being are all one. If that case, then happiness is not even actually a thing that we should be trying to define. It's the natural state of a human being. That's the way he or she is supposed to be. If the machine is working right, it's naturally happy. It's not naturally neutral, it's happy, meaning satisfied in that sense. See, the fact that we, in a commodity-based society, have begun to turn happiness into a product, which is why I mentioned all the books and all the seminars and everything, because it's a product, and they're trying to tell you, how are you going to get this product? Some products you buy on the shelf, and some products you get through these and these methods. Some methods are ridiculous, and some methods may even be legitimate. Even the soulful method that I mentioned is a legitimate method, but it's still treating happiness as a product. The question is how you get this product, so through these meditations, through these behaviors, and so on. But if happiness indeed is your birthright, then nobody can give it to you because you have it already. It's just a matter of you uncovering it. So then the methods are there really to uncover a happiness that really lies at the heart of your being. No difference that your heart is beating and your mind is functioning. If the heart and mind are not functioning, God forbid, is because there's an impediment. So if a person is not happy, that means there's some aberration. So if that's the case, happiness is a natural state of the human being, and it is. It absolutely is. And that's why you find in the Torah, you find the expression, serve God with joy. Why does it have to state that? Because it's easy for us as we grow into adults to stop being joyous due to different life circumstances. So you can interpret that as being, okay, go get joy, or you can interpret it, no, access the joy that you already have inside of you. And one can strongly argue the latter is correct, and I'll give there's many proofs, but one of them is the end of the first 4 volumes of what's called the Shulchan Aruch, Code of Jewish Law. The first one ends with the line, Toiv Lev Mishta Tamid. It's a verse from the book of, I think, Proverbs. Toiv Lev Mishta Tamid, which means, good is the heart that is always celebrating. Which is interesting. Always. The word Tamid, always. How can a person always celebrate? The only way you can always celebrate is because celebration is not a state, is not an activity, it's a state of being. And it's really, it's a constant thing. You know, I talk about this very often, especially recently, because I study my grandchildren. And I study the natural joy and happiness that they have. That is not product-based. That's not a result of all the things I mentioned. It's not a result even of any activity or methodology. It's a natural state. Now, obviously, you can make a child saddened by doing something, hurting the child, God forbid, or depriving them of something. But a child naturally is happy and finds happiness around it. So basically, we live in a world of adults that have become miserable and are sharing their misery with the rest of whoever they meet. Now, maybe misery is a strong word, so let's not use misery. Maybe we'll use the word despondence. I don't know. I'm not sure what word to use. Whatever word that works for you that doesn't disturb you too much, because I'm not looking here to shake anybody up. I'm looking more to get the point across. So then the question now is, if that's indeed the case, that it's our natural state of being, then the question is, how have we wandered away from it, and how do we regain it? It's a very, very different question than saying that you never had it, and now how are you going to find it? Because if you didn't have something and then you lived a life that's been sad, you could say, maybe I can't find happiness. But if it's inside of you, it's like someone saying, it's a muscle, you just have not used it for a while. Gone into atrophy. But it's yours. That's a very different type of effort, knowing it's there, and you have to figure out how to uncover it. So I want to talk now about, before we get to that, to the concept of the difference between the verb and the noun thing, which I often talk about as well. Is happiness a verb or a noun? What I mean by that is it a state? Is it actions, or is it a state of being? So just to make the point clearly, we are land mammals, right? We live in dry land. However, we can go into the water, either on a beach, a swimming pool, a shower, a bath. And when we do, we land mammals get wet. That is clearly not a state of being. It's not our natural state of being to be wet. A fish in the sea, however, its natural state is wetness. So you don't ever ask a question, does a fish get wet? Does water get wet? No, because water is wetness. Anything that's a state of being or a noun does not become something else, because that's what it is. Like we are humans. You don't become human, you are human. However, when it comes to certain other things, like I just said, wetness, for us that's an unnatural thing, so we get wet. A dry hand puts its hand in the water, it gets wet. Water will never get wet. And a fish, you can technically say, doesn't get wet either, because that's its domain, that's where it lives. So let's talk about happiness. But I want to give another example, which maybe make it easier to understand. I've shared this a number of times here. I once spoke in this class about the difference between good people and people who do good things. See, that's the same thing. People who do good things is a verb. Person who does good actions, good deeds. A good person is not about the actions, it's about the person. what's the difference? A good person is 24/7 good. A person who does good things is only when they're doing good things, they're doing good things. And when they're not. So I once talked about this at length. At the end of the class, a gentleman in his early 50s came over to me. It was years ago. It was not here, it was another place. And he was like with tears in his eyes. He said to me, I have to thank you. Tonight, you answered a question that I've been struggling with for 30 years. More than 30 years, 40 years, since I'm a child. He said, my father was a very well-known philanthropist and giving person. He passed away already since a while back, and I loved him, and people loved him. I remember Tuesday nights, the door was open. Anyone who wanted could come into his home and would not go away unhappy. He'd go away satisfied, whether it was a loan, whether it was a donation, whether it was helping them find a job, a connection. He gave unconditionally on Tuesday nights. But if you came Wednesday night, when he played his poker game, doesn't matter who you were and no matter how needy you were not allowed in. So on one hand, my father was a really good person. I saw it with my own eyes. And it was every Tuesday. It was no exceptions. On the other hand, he treated my mother not so well, some of us not so well. There were plenty of things about him that were not very pleasant. And as a child, children are very simple. Was he good? Was he not good? Sometimes he was very cruel. And sometimes he was extremely great. He says, you answered the question today. He said, because my father did good things. I don't know if he was a good person. He says, I don't want to be disparaging about him, but he did good things, and I'm not taking away. He says, I don't take anything. Whatever he did, he helped many, many people. But it could be that was his so-called tradition. He learned it from his father. It could be that was his comfort zone, when it was convenient for him. But when it was inconvenient, when it was not in his schedule, he was not necessarily good. You couldn't call him 24/7 and ask him for anything. Again, he said to me a number of times, I'm not taking away from my father. My father did a lot of great things for many people. But it's a very big distinction. So the same is true. Whereas a good person, meaning someone that 24/7, no matter what the circumstances are, they will do something even when it's very inconvenient. Okay. Now, let's take this back to the happiness idea. You can be happy, similar to what I said earlier about pleasure, while you're doing something that makes you happy. I'm not even discussing whether it's a superficial thing. It may even be a good thing, But it's not your state of being. It's not your natural state. It's not like a fish in water. It's you are doing something that's happy. Better than nothing, and a good beginning, because it could lead you to more. But it's not what we really want to achieve. You want to achieve is a state of happiness that is all-consuming and all-pervasive. Which means the following. See, when you do happy things, the things that make you happy, while you're doing that, they're happy. But then there are things that make you sad. And while you're dead, you're sad. A happy person, even when they're sad, they're happy. If you get what I'm saying. I'll explain in a moment. And a person who's doing happy things, even when they're happy, they're not necessarily happy. Even though they're doing it. Because it's not the fish and water thing. It's not your state of being. You're behaving that way. And for that moment it's good. And maybe even lasting. But it's not really accessing the natural state of your, what I said before, inherent happiness that each of us really is our birthright. You'll see people who've suffered tragedy. You see two people suffering a similar tragedy, God forbid. And one of them becomes bitter and angry and can't come back to themselves. Especially if someone did it to them, they carry feelings of vengeance, of not being, it's not fair, and they're consumed with anger. And you see another person suffered exactly the same thing. I'm just giving it a hypothetical, it's never. But let's, for argument's sake, two people, God forbid, had a loss to a brother and sister. And you see another person is not less saddened by what happened. It's not like they're cold or aloof or something like that. But rather, they just are more resilient and are able to ride through it differently. What's the difference between these two? That's where you really see the difference. The difference is because it has nothing to do with what happened to them, it has to do with what they were like before. If you're by nature a 24/7 happy person, that doesn't mean sad things won't happen to you. It just means sadness will not shake you to your core because you fundamentally have that peace inside you. It doesn't mean you're not troubled by it. It doesn't mean you don't cry. It doesn't mean you don't You can even be tremendously grieve over it, but you are like a steady ship in the middle of a storm. Whereas the first person is a ship that is capsizing in a storm, or at least being damaged. So both are experiencing the storm, but that's the difference in a good swimmer and a bad swimmer, or an average swimmer. A good swimmer does not experience, a good swimmer is not immune to storms. A good swimmer also has storms, but he doesn't fight the storm. He'll navigate well, he or she. He'll go with the flow, he won't try to fight the tide. A bad swimmer or an average swimmer doesn't know what to do when there's a storm. So that's the key. When you see a tree standing after a storm, and some trees fell, they both experienced the same storm. One had deeper roots. The same thing is with happiness. The happiness of a person, which is our natural state, is a 24/7 thing. And when you have access to that, then sad things are the aberration, are the anomaly. And the happiness remains your status quo. So let's go back to children, because children are the best of all, because we were all once children. Would you agree? Nobody in this room was not a child once. That's a certainty. That's a mathematical certainty, right? That's good to know. Some things are certain in this world. So we were once children. And as children, we were not as complex as we are now. And we didn't have all the phobias and whatever, fears and inhibitions. You can fill all the blanks in. So there is a child in us. We were that child. Today you're not that child, but that child is who you were. And what happened when you were there and what happened here? What happened is, as I said, you were exposed to, firstly, people that were unhappy. You're exposed to disappointments. And if you didn't have someone who was a role model that showed you how to navigate and was a happy person, you begin to emulate the unhappy people in your life. Now, if you have a role model that's happy, that's a great gift. It almost can guarantee that you will know how to do it because you saw it. If your parents were that way, or the people that influenced on you, had influences on you. But if parents were unhappy and they complained a lot, and you as a child absorbed it all because you saw how they dealt with adversity and they dealt with and challenges and difficulties and setbacks, that's probably the strongest barometer of your own happiness ranking, so to speak, based on what you saw in your life. Now, this doesn't mean that there's no hope. It just means it's an additional challenge. So children on their own are going to be a happy state. I've seen this. I watched my grandson, my granddaughter. I watched them very closely. I wanted to see this. I saw there were times they were sad, and I saw how easy it was to get them to get back happy. It was not as easy to get them to be sad. Of course, you take away a child's thing. You're this and this, child cry, they have tantrums. I'm not talking about that. We're talking about what was easier. It was they gravitated always back to the natural, calm state of happiness. And, of course, that would change as they get older and they start seeing other influences. So I'm not going to say this I didn't do a so-called scientific survey, but I don't need one. Because you just go study children. And you tell me what your results. I don't think there'll be a difference in any culture anywhere. Unless, of course, again, if they're being inundated with other attitudes, it's another story. Children growing up in a war zone, or children growing up being educated to be terrorists or something like that, obviously it's a different story. But that's a concerted effort to shape the child in a certain way. I'm talking about take away these type of influences, just let the child grow, let the tree grow on its own, obviously with the nurturing and the guidance that the child needs to grow. You will find the natural happiness there. So then I go back to what I said earlier. So it's not about finding it, it's about uncovering it. It's very, very different. It's a very big difference if you're looking for something that you have, you just can't see it, than something you don't even have and now I'm going to go discover it. So this is the key thing to recognize. It's right here inside you right now. And now I'm going to talk about methodologies, but the key thing I want to say, it's not the methodology that's going to gain you this product and commodity called happiness. It's methodologies that are going to get rid of the layers that don't let you access your natural happiness. That's the thing. Because just like this child has grown now into an adult that may not be so happy because things happened, You have to undo that which has happened. So in other words, we're not looking to find happiness, we're looking just to get rid of the things that cause the happiness to go undercover. It's a very different approach, and it's not semantics, as you can imagine. Very different. So let's define happiness now based on this longer discussion now. So this then happiness I would define completely differently. I wouldn't use success, even though there's connections to it. I wouldn't use, obviously, pleasure. I wouldn't even use soulfulness and getting to your core in a way. I would go even deeper than that. I would say happiness is synonymous with life. Why? Because from a very basic level, as the Bible, the Torah puts it, you were created in the divine image. You're a piece of God. Can God be unhappy? God is God. God is the creator. God is the beginning of it all, not subject to forces that make you happy or unhappy. So it's not even a matter of finding a peaceful place inside yourself. It's who you are. The essence of who you are is one and the same as being a happy person. Which is basically stating that if you exist, existence comes with happiness. That's why a child is naturally happy. A child does not have to be taught to be happy. Very similar to language, for example. A child learns language by age 2, 3, children are speaking. How's that possible? Go try to teach an animal to speak. Even 2, 3, 30 years won't work. Why? Because a child has language already in them. They just haven't known how to express it. That's clear. Whether the child will speak English or French or Hebrew or Russian or whatever it may be, that's already... But the concept of language communication a child has. Just like music. Music does not take any effort to teach someone to be touched by a song. You have to teach someone to play an instrument. But to listen to an instrument doesn't require any effort, because we know today that there are studies that show that a child in his mother's womb will even move to sway to a tune. It's another discussion. We talked about this because music is the language of the soul. The point is the soul and happiness are one and the same thing. You have a soul, you have happiness. So I would define it as being knowing that you have everything you need right here, right now, in this space and time. Why? Because you were put here by God with a purpose. And that's all. It makes no difference whether others have it or not. You don't have to look to others. It's all within you. You have everything you need. When you study children, you look closely, you're going to see that. They won't even articulate it. Like I mentioned before, health doesn't sound like anything. Really happy people have no way of describing what it means. Because it's just a state of being. It's like saying, I breathe, so I'm happy. When you look at children, it's not like you go over to the child, even if you can have a conversation with a child and you say, can you tell me why you're so calm today? You know, Donald Trump just won the presidency. Half of America is protesting. Why is it bothering you? I'm just using that as somewhat of a joke. You know, or the financial markets are not doing well. Or there's terrorism in the world. A child won't even be able to answer the question. Why? Because a child, besides the fact they may not understand the whole dynamics, a child will basically say, I don't know, I have what I need. I have my mother and my father. I have my games. I have my brothers and sisters. I'm going to play in school. It's very simple. I wouldn't even use those words. It's because the state of being of life is just content. I'm content. I don't need anything. I have everything I need right here and now. So one of the things, of course, that causes us to lose that is because we become materialistic. Children are not materialistic. Yeah, children like things. If someone else has it, they want it too. But they're not naturally materialistic. It's not like, they become materialistic because they see adults are materialistic. What's materialistic mean? We begin to identify happiness and success with objects. I went to somebody's house. They have this. I have to have it too. Or I have to have something comparable. You start becoming object-oriented, whether it's money or it's the equivalent of money or it's possessions, cars. And then you see, of course, advertising. By the time we're age 20, statistics show we've seen or heard 1 million advertisements. You don't think that has an effect on our psyche? Because there's no way you bought all those million things you saw. So then you feel inadequate because look what they're driving, and I don't have the money to drive that. Look at this, look at that, look at that. So suddenly what happens is happiness starts being defined by commodities, by items, and by the lack of items. And you convince yourself that if I had that, that'll be happy. That's, of course, every advertiser loves you to think that way. That if you buy this, you'll be happier. Then you'll buy it. It's called the pleasure principle or the pain principle, either avoiding pain or gaining pleasure. This is what we're being, the best psychologists in the world are not in therapy. They're in advertising. You know, I once met a guy, and I said, what are you doing these days? He says, I'm in advertising. I said, you were a therapist once. You used to help mankind. He says, well, now I'm manipulating mankind. He says, the same psychology I'm using. I'm making a lot more money. So I said, then I guess you're going to get older. You'll probably go back to therapy to heal all the people you screwed up. You know? Like, you know, like they say, the radar detectors and the radars are manufactured by the same company. You know, the better mouse, the better mousetrap. So you make a killing both ways, you know. Anyway. So what's the point? It's to manipulate. Exactly. What are you talking about? I mean, you see advertising. I love to study advertising. It's the best psychological manipulation you've ever seen. You're watching how it gets you, you know. Coca-Cola. Brilliant. Like, you know, this brown fizzled drink is about, like, pleasure and you're with it. And what? It's a stupid little carbonated drink, you know, that they got it in our heads. You know, I'm not an anti-Coke guy, but you know what I mean. Completely unnecessary, completely superficial, completely. But it's in the head. And you go, you know, you go down Times Square and you see the wet, the beads of sweat on a Coke bottle. You say, I got to have a Coke, you know. I'm going to have a hot dog. How could I have a hot dog without a Coke? You know, you get the idea. And on and on and on and on. Okay. So now we're living in a world where we're no longer at peace with ourselves. Everything around us is stimulating us and demanding and expecting, and there's the competition and all that. So throwing money into the picture, well, as soon as you need money, hey, you know something? I need more. I need to be able to be more comfortable. And you've really wandered away from the real source of happiness, which is just that you exist. How do you like that? I exist, therefore I am happy. When you're able to reach that place, that's when you have happiness, because existence and happiness is one thing. God put you on this earth. He didn't put billions of others. He put you here. You. But that's not a source. That's the whole beginning. Your whole beginning begins that you were born. As I always say, birth is God saying you matter. The line I use in Torah Meaningful Life. You matter. You fundamentally matter. You're indispensable. You tell me what can give you more happiness than that. But it's not enough for us because, as I said, we become, a lack of a better word, materialistic. So how then do we go back? So there now comes some of the methods that are out there work, fine. But I want to just share a few key things. If indeed happiness is one with your existence, so then really what you need to get back is to existence. So what else is natural to our existence? That's the key. That's the question you have to ask. Whatever else is natural to existing and is not superimposed, as in, let's say, material gain, those are the factors, those are the ingredients that will bring you happiness. I'll give you an example. What's natural to us is to be giving people. Not takers, but givers. When you give, you're always happier than when you take. When we live in a commodity-oriented society and happiness is a product, then of course taking. I want to take and I want to also take happiness. How much do you want for it? You know, tell me what the price is. But if happiness is your state of being, a natural part of a confident person is that they give. What does it mean? Just like a flame. Does a flame have to be trained to illuminate its environment? No, a flame is a natural illuminator. It's what makes it be. The soul is compared to a flame. The soul of Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, the soul of a human being is the flame of God. A flame, just like it's natural to a fish to be in water, it's natural to a flame to give, to illuminate. So if you're not illuminating, if you're not giving to others, just by your presence, that when someone comes close to you, they feel empowered. You know, I've often given an example of people that, you know, that you meet people and when you go over to them, you always feel drained. And there are other people you feel empowered. Not even with anything they say. You sometimes meet somebody and you just feel that the energy, they're just like draining your energy. Either it's because they're angry or they're bitter or they like demand attention. They sometimes just give off that vibe, that But there are people you go by. There's a certain pleasantness, and you just feel, hey, I feel good, I feel fine. You go to a party, you go to a wedding, you go to an event, you immediately, if you know if the hosts are in a bad place, it spills right over. Everybody's in a bad place because the caterer is bad and the waiters, and it spills right over into everybody. And you can tell immediately. You ever go to a place, you right away walk in, you feel, there's a lot of tension in this room, And then there are places you go just a machaya in Yiddish, they say. It's just a pleasure. You're just there, it's just pleasant. People are pleasant. I mean, these things are not so tangible, but they're very real. There's not even a question about it. There are people you want to be around. There are people you don't want to be around. I mean, it's sad to say that. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to pose the harsher question, which is, what type of person are you? Because you may not know. You have to ask others, and will they tell you honestly? They'll say, I really hate being around you. Very few people are going to tell you that. I mean, there are people that will tell you that, but not many. But it's good to know. It's good to find out what kind of energy do you give off. What do you exude? Because it's not something you can fake. You can't fake that. You absolutely can't fake it. A person with an attitude is a person with an attitude. And I even see salespeople who are trained and they want to make a sale and they still have an attitude. And so that's how you can't fake it. Yeah, you can fake it short term, and there are people who are very good manipulators. I'm not saying you can't at all fake it, but it's hard to maintain, and it's not easy, unless somebody's really making a very concerted effort and like really completely manipulative, which is a particular type of person. But even that can be. The point I'm making here is not whether we are naive and we can pick it up. The point is, goodness and happiness shines. It doesn't need to be told shine. That's what I'm trying to say. Like a flame doesn't need to be told illuminate or warm. Fire will warm and illuminate its environment. It's a natural extension. So a natural extension of existing is happiness, but another natural extension is giving. So you take a walk. If you're in a bad mood, why don't you go find a child with special needs, like Down syndrome or something, and go take a walk with them for an hour and be nice to them. You tell me how you're going to feel afterwards. Now, a person who's bitter and angry won't do it. But if you do it, guaranteed you'll be happier than before no question about it. Because first of all, you've gotten not focusing on yourself, you're helping someone else. Secondly, you will be surprised that you'll get more from that child than you'll give the child. Because children like that give off unbelievable love. They don't have airs about them. I especially mention Down syndrome because for some reason those children have tremendous amount of love. And they're not caught up in sadly, they're not in that social structure where they have to be competing with others. So that's just an example. Volunteer for something. The last thing you want to do when you're not happy is to become a parasite and a taker. Because that's the source of all unhappiness. Because it just says you don't have enough to give. Confident people are givers. They have no problem with giving because, hey, I'm not losing anything. A flame doesn't get weaker when it gives off light. It's not like, I gave away part of my light, I'm not bright anymore. It doesn't work that way. Just like a person who's intelligent, who gives off intelligence, it's not like I gave something away. They don't become less intelligent because they shared intelligence with someone. It's true, charity, financial, but ask people who give charity. I don't think anybody's ever become poor from giving charity. It's difficult because giving is hard, but it's so there are other things as well that are methods. Basically, anything that relates to your natural self will therefore always bring happiness. So how do we go back to that childlike state? So I mentioned giving as one example. The soulfulness and the mindfulness is definitely another one, because at the end of the day, what are you really doing? You're pushing aside all the things that you've added on in your life that are just causing you anxiety. And you're going back to a place, breathing, in Hebrew, neshama and neshima. Breath and soul are the same words. You know that? Just pronounced differently. Because it says in the Bible, in the Torah, that God breathed a soul of life into the nostrils of Adam and Eve. So breath and soul are connected, which is why breathing exercise, in general, breathing is a soulful thing. And it does bring a certain calm when you breathe, self-focus and so on. From a Jewish point of view, Shabbat is a tremendously happy day in that sense. It's an oasis in time, you cut away, shut down as much as possible your materialistic activities, and you're going back into a soulful place. Now, for many people, that could be terrifying because they're usually not there. Okay, so that's like someone who's lost touch with their own soulful happiness. So it may take a little time to get yourself trained back in, but that's the way you go. So it's a very different approach of what all the alternatives and options that today are out there, which are all, as I said, commodity-based, all product-based, and all action-based. Here we're talking about a state of being which is your natural state. It's synonymous with your existence, and it's synonymous with all the most healthy things that are part of who you are. You act based on those natural things, and you will naturally be happy. That's why you'll find, and I think, who's the one that said it? It'll come to me in a moment. A great statement, he said, that happiness, those that search for happiness never find happiness. It's those that do what has to be done, as a result, happiness emerges. Huh? Yeah. It's worded very well by, not a book, it's a statement by one of the thinkers in the last generation, last century. When I need the statement, I don't remember it. It'll come to me. I've written it a number of times. Anyway, why? Because happiness is similar to what the Mishnah says. It says there are three crowns: the crown of kingship, of majesty, the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood. And then it says, V'keser Shem Tov, the crown of the good name, Oila al Gabein, rises above them all. So everyone asks the question, then there's 4 crowns. Why does it say there's 3? Because there are 3 crowns that you can access through actions. But a good name, you can't go and buy a good name. Good name is a result of you doing good things, and then your reputation becomes a good, sterling reputation. Again, I'm not talking about some manipulation or forgery or stuff like that. I'm talking about same thing is with happiness. Happiness is the glow of a person who is in touch with their existence, with their presence. That's what it is. It's the glow of your natural state of being. When the glow is not there, it means that you've gone away from your natural state of being and you've become something else. You become either a business person, or as I always say, instead of someone asks you who you are, they give you the business card. It's not who you are, it's what you do. You become a product of what you do. Or like some people say, or the way I once have phrased it is that when your self-worth is defined by your net worth, you know you've wandered away. Adam wandered away when he ate from the tree of knowledge, so when God comes into the Garden of Eden, he says, Ayeko, where are you? He didn't know where he was, but he didn't recognize him. He's not the person that you created, that confident, the one that exuded happiness, the one that knew exactly why you're here. You wandered away, you're lost. So really, being a lost soul and being unhappy go hand in hand. Discovering and identifying and finding what you exist, happiness is an outgrowth of that. So I saw real happy people in my life. They were all those people that were just present in the way that they knew why they were here. And that's it. And it's not something you can fabricate. They were just in touch with their here, and they never got distracted or fazed by all the things that happen in their lives. Obviously, these are people who are passionate and not that they're passive and indifferent. That's not what I'm saying. However, they don't get fazed by it because it's a swimmer who knows that I'm right here, this time and this place is where I was put. And I'm at peace with that. And that, of course, requires getting in touch with that part of it. As I said, giving is one way to get there. And there are other ways. Other ways is basically going back to simplicity, to things that are simple. If you make things complicated, it gets into the world of commerce and of negotiation and of transactions. That's where you're always going to have anxiety because it's just not a natural place. So maybe it is a healthy thing from time to time to go to playground, and maybe just, go back to your childhood in a way, and experience something that is simple and natural. And as I said, there are many, many methods to get there. But the main point I wanted to address here in this talk was that it's really your birthright. It's what you have already. It's just a matter of uncovering and accessing it. Now, of course, being around people that are that way is maybe the most powerful thing of all. Because if in your life you've been around people the opposite, you need something to counter it. And it's not always something it's easy to just say, okay, I'll switch on the happy button. So that's why being around people, being around activities, volunteering or being part of some project or activity or campaign that is life-affirming. These are things that feed that natural side of yourself. So, my friends, you may wonder, why am I speaking about it this week? The truth is, it's been on my mind. A lot of people ask me this question. I thought it's appropriate to speak. Of course, you can always make connections to the weekly chapter in the Torah, but I'll leave that for the scholars to figure out. Talk about Abraham and Sarah. They were obviously naturally happy people, and they were the biggest givers. They were always giving. They always looked a way to give. It wasn't even an effort. It was just the natural state of being. So I want to bless everybody, above all, not to find happiness, but to uncover the happiness that you already have. And it's always good to know that. Hopefully, I always feel it as a compliment when someone says, I left the room after meeting you happier than when I came in. That's a beautiful thing to hear, right? So I hope everybody leaves here this evening feeling happier than when you came. That's a good sign. But of course, carrying it over is the challenge. Remember, life has its challenges, but you have to get to a place where all those activities, all those events in your life are the stops of your, are the legs of your journey. But you are not a product of your journeys. You're not a product of your circumstances. You're not a product and not a victim of circumstances. Definitely not. You are a force placed here, a divine agent to create change in this world, to bring light, to warm others. That's who you are. And the closer you're in touch with that, the more conscious you are, the more you act on it, the happier you'll be. It's as simple as that. And just remember that. Maybe that's the mantra. You got to remember it, because it's very easy to gravitate back to other stuff. Because 1 second, so you tell me I shouldn't work. I didn't say you shouldn't work. But remember, your work is a job. It's a particular thing you do. It's not who you are. It's what you need to do. And trust me, the more happy you are, the better your work will be, and the better other things will be, because everything becomes elevated by this attitude. So, I'm smiling. I don't know. I feel happier myself, I must say, talking about this topic. So I wish you all a very happy week, and happiness and joy. And we continue our journey together. Those of you here, those of you online. We have every possible line. We have Facebook. So if you like this, share it, like it. That's the Facebook audience. Then there's the YouTube audience. I feel like same broadcast every place, But it's good. May we use the channels, may we use the airwaves only to spread good light and good energy. So everyone have a very pleasant week, and until next Wednesday, be well. Yes. Absolutely. I should have mentioned gratitude. Gratitude is excellent. Gratitude. Excellent. Correct.
Yeah, it really lifts you. I can't wait to listen to it again.
Again?
Yes.
Okay.